Hello and welcome to the Russian Empire History Podcast, the history of all the peoples of the Russian Empire. I'm your host, J.P. Bristow. This is Season 1, The Forest, the Steppe, and the Birth of the Russian Empire, Episode 99, The Battle of Kulikovo. Then it was as if eagles were flying from across the midnight lands. But they were not eagles flying, they were all the knyazes of Rus, arriving to aid Grand Knyaz Dmitry Ivanovich. Reliable and experienced in battle, their horses were like greyhounds, their armour gilt, their helmets Circassian, their shields from Moscow, their daggers Friazsky, that is, Italian, and their swords Damascene, Zadonshina. And after a few days, Mamai crossed the great Volga River with all his strength, and added many other hordes to his great army, and said to them, "Let us go to the Rusland and get rich from Rus gold." So all the godless went to Rus, like a roaring lion, like a spiteful viper. The tale of the rout of Mamai. Kulikovo Polye, or Snipes Field in English, lies in a bend on the River Don, around 300 kilometers south of Moscow. Today it lies in Tula Oblast, part of the old Vyatichi lands. Tula, later to become Russia's armory, already existed as a small town, but the region was still sparsely populated. After the conflict that had been escalating between Moscow and Mamai over the last few years, in August 1380, Dmitry heard that Mamai was gathering a serious army to strike at the northeastern Knyazevство, the largest army that had been seen in this part of the world for over a century. He decided that he could not wait for them to come to him. By the beginning of September, he had assembled his own forces by Moscow, and other knyazes had begun to join him. They marched south towards Kolomna, where they would rendezvous with more of his allies. By the time the army assembled, around half its men were from places other than Moscow. The chronicles tell us that Bielaozero, Dmitrov, Galich, Kashira, Kolomna, Kostroma, Mazhaysky, Pereyaslav, Polotsk, Rostov, Vladimir, Yaroslavl, and more sent contingents. Algirdas had died a couple of years earlier, and two of his sons, Dmitry and Andrei, had lost the battle over the succession and ended up in Moscow serving Dmitry. They came with several hundred of their own Rus and Lithuanian warriors. A few dozen boyars came from Ryazan with their followers, although the Knyaz of Ryazan maintained his alliance with Mamai and did not. Mikhail of Tver, forced to submit to Dmitry's authority, but probably feeling no affection for him, stayed away, as did Dmitry's other old rival, Dmitry of Suzdal and Nizhny Novgorod. As usual, Novgorod did not refuse the Grand Knyaz's call, but its men were late and missed the muster. Alongside the Rus were Mongol converts like Mirza Musa, who had brought his sons and retinue to Moscow and been baptized Pyotr. Dmitry will later reward him with a Rurikid wife. The governor of Pereyaslav, Andrei Serkisov, leading his city's contingent, had entered Dmitry's service with a Mongol prince named Serkis, who was also baptized. Mamai also had some Rus who had gone over to his side. After 150 years of conscription into Mongol armies and fighting alongside and under Mongol command, the previously mostly infantry Rus army had become very similar to the Mongols. The Rus used the same composite bow and were noted for their archery. Like the core of the Mongol army, the boyar cavalry was a warrior elite, trained to fight in the saddle since early childhood. Dmitry had a suit of plate armor, much like you could find in Western Europe, but this was not generally in favor among warriors who emphasized speed and mobility. The Rus had not adopted the heavy cavalry charge that characterized Western medieval battles, but both the Mongols and the Rus had been moving towards heavier cavalry. They wore chainmail and lamellar armor made from iron plates. The Rus copied the Mongol style of a metal disc worn on the chest, both as protection and as a part that could be decorated with sigils or evidence of the warrior's wealth. Their horses also wore lamellar armor over quilted padding, often painted in bright colors. Along with their bows, they carried a lance and a sword. It was usually the Mongol-style heavy saber, but Western broadswords were also gaining popularity. Although they had similar equipment and similar tactics to the Mongols, the boyars had a reputation for weaker discipline. Even the chronicles record the Rus losing fights due to being drunk, and disputes over precedence could give any Rus general a headache. The tale of the rout of Mamai mentions that Dmitry assigned his own commander to each regiment, rather than relying on their own leaders. Besides the practical value of enforcing his chain of command, the fact that he was able to do this shows the increasing authority of the Grand Knyaz compared to previous times. The Rus had also adopted the overall organization of the army from the Mongols. While a Western European army was divided into vanguard, middle guard, and rear guard, the Rus and the Mongols divided their armies into 5: the sentry, advance, main, right, and left regiments. So, Dmitry had assembled an impressive force. The consensus among modern historians is that he had somewhere between 15 and 20,000 men under his command. But Mamai still had more, probably around 30,000. The chronicles say 9 tumens, but due to the problems we were discussing in the last episode, a tumen was now more like 3,000 than 10,000 men. His main priority was Sarai, not fighting the Rus, but he did not control the capital right now, and the Volga Mongols refused to join him. His core force was his own heavy cavalry from Crimea and what is now southern Ukraine. The increase in armor meant that the force was now split about half and half between lancers and archers. But Mamai also had his own allies and non-Mongol subjects. He had around 1,000 men supplied by Knyaz Oleg of Ryazan, a force of Circassian mounted archers supplemented the Mongols as lighter troops, and there was a contingent of Armenians. More surprisingly, he also had around 1,000 Italian infantrymen with spears and crossbows. Italian mercenaries were emerging as one of Europe's leading military forces at this time, although historian Mark Galeotti cautions that some of Genoa's troops in the Black Sea region may have been local recruits. One thing was different between the two opposing forces. Dmitry was going to be in the thick of it, fighting with his men. Mamai, as was the Mongol practice, would be commanding from the distance of a nearby hilltop. The Rus had taken on another practice from the Mongols, sending out wide-ranging scouts to gather intelligence as they moved forward. One of Dmitry's scouts was a Moscow boyar of Lithuanian descent named Semyon Melik, who captured a Mongol and extracted information from him. As the army crossed the Oka, still a few days away from the battlefield, Melik brought word that Grand Duke Jogaila was marching with a Lithuanian army to join Mamai. The Mongol army was already bigger. These reinforcements would make it close to double the size of the Rus force. Dmitry decided that he needed to bring Mamai to battle before the Lithuanians could arrive, and pushed on quickly. The Mongol encampment lay on the south of the Don. Dmitry crossed to the other side, aiming to deploy his forces first, using the forest and the steep banks of some tributary rivers to limit the battlefield, and therefore the Mongols' ability to maneuver. Before leaving Moscow, Dmitry and his men had been blessed by Sergius of Radonezh, later to become one of Russia's most important saints. Born into a boyar family, Sergius, or Sergei in Russian, had become a monk and extremely influential within the church. He founded the Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius near Moscow, Russia's most important monastery, often called the spiritual center of the Russian Orthodox Church. Metropolitan Alexei had asked him to be his successor, but Sergei refused, and generally he avoided any participation in politics. This time, however, he gave his blessing and sent 2 monks from the monastery with him, Alexander Perisvet and Rodion Asliabia. On the morning of the battle, all the chronicles say, Dmitry told his men they were fighting for God. While, as we've previously noted and we'll discuss in the next episode, the chronicles were written by churchmen with an agenda, orthodoxy was what these men from different kняжества and backgrounds had in common. Under Sergius and a number of other prominent leaders, the church was becoming more a part of people's lives than it ever had been. The army marched under banners with the Virgin Mary, whose feast day was 8th of September, Moscow's patron saint, St. George, the patron saint of the Rus, Andrew. Remember that legend from the primary chronicle of him coming to preach to the Scythians. Dmitry had the face of Jesus on his personal banner, and others carried images of Rurikid saints, Boris and Gleb. Dmitry arranged his men in a standard battle formation, with one key difference. The Sentry Regiment, a screening force of light cavalry and scouts, was sent forwards under the command of Moscow boyar Mikhail Akingov. Behind them, the governor of Kolomna, Mikula Velyaminov, led the advance regiment. Dmitry Algirdovich and his Lithuanians had demanded a place here to stand against his half-brother, Jogaila, if the Lithuanians should make it to the battle. The main regiment, with the bulk of the boyar cavalry and Dmitry's own retinue, took the centre, with the left and right regiments, also cavalry, protecting the flanks. The deviation from standard plans was a force of heavy cavalry led by Dmitry's cousin, Knyaz Vladimir of Serpukhov, which moved under the cover of morning fog into the forest at the side of the meadow. The ambush regiment. Dmitry swapped armour with a young boyar named Mikhail Brynok. His plan was simple: the standard battlefield position of his forces and his shining plate armour in the centre was intended to give Mamai the confidence that his superior numbers would carry the day and lure him in to an all-out assault. The same wicked king who will be devoured by the devil himself for perdition cried out suddenly, "These are my strengths, and if I do not prevail over the Rus knyazes, how will I return home? I could not bear my disgrace." And he ordered his godless polovtsi to prepare for battle. The tale of the rout of Mamai. Mamai needed to beat the Russians and to take loot and supplies, as well as to extract the tribute that they were so reluctant to pay, because he had a, to him, more serious enemy in the south, Tokhtamish, a protege of the new power in Central Asia, Timur, Tamerlane the Great, who had already captured Sarai. This gave him some urgency, although his original plan had been to wait for his reinforcements to arrive from Ryazan and Lithuania. So much so that he had not had the usual scouts out gathering intelligence, and the Mongols seemed to have been caught off guard when the rising sun burned away the morning fog to show the Rus arrayed against them. With Dmitry deployed and ready to fight, Mamai, with his superior numbers, would lose face if he did not accept the challenge. The Russians were too experienced fighting with and for the Mongols to fall for the old feigned retreat, so Mamai planned to use his advantage in numbers to grind them down with waves of attacks. The Genoese infantry were placed at the centre as an anchor, and the rest of his troops were arranged in the usual 5-regiment formation, similar to the Rus they were facing. The battle would last 4 hours. At around 11 o'clock, as the sun cleared the last of the fog, the Mongols marched into the field. The chronicles don't hide the impression they made. The sun glittered on the spears, the trumpets blared, kettle drums carried on camels thundered. Some of the Rus soldiers were overcome and fled, only to run into the Lithuanians later on. Like a throwback to earlier times, the battle allegedly began with champions challenging each other. The monk, Alexander Peresviet, from a boyar family and a trained warrior before taking orders, rode out against Chelubey, a famous wrestler and horseman. "It's better to perish by our own swords than to be in the power of the pagans," the chronicles claim he declared. The two champions smashed into each other with such force that both were killed. But while Chelubey was knocked to the ground, Alexander's horse carried his body, still in the saddle, back to Rus lines. The Rus took this for a good omen. Then the real battle commenced. Contrary to expectations, with Mamai's infantry advancing under cover of crossbow fire from the Genoans and sweeping through the sentry regiment. Clearing the skirmishers at the sentry regiment and pushing the advance regiment back would open up space on the meadow for a cavalry charge. It took around an hour of fighting to get to the point that Mamai could order his right wing into the fray. The continuing pressure from the infantry in the centre prevented Dmitry from supporting the advance regiment. Its commander, Mykola Velyaminov, fell and it began to break up, retreating but still in good order, back into the main regiment. Andrei and Dmitry Olgierdovich had been separated in the fighting, and each joined one of the wings. Now the two main forces would come against each other. Mamai's infantry were tiring and did not pursue Dmitry's advance regiment as it retreated. Now it was the turn of the heavy cavalry. Concentrating their attack on Mikhail Branok, Dmitry's brave double, visible across the field in his gleaming plate armour, under the red flag of St. George and Dmitry's personal banner with the golden face of Jesus on a dark field. Around him were Dmitry's personal guard, including his brother-in-law, Knyaz Fyodor of Bielo-Ozero. It was a classic steppe attack, massed flights of archers followed by the charge of the heavy lancers from both wings. The Rus infantry screen in front of the main regiment braced their spears and their shield wall and waited for impact. The Mongols hit the main regiment like a hammer, driving through the lines towards the fake Dmitry. His bodyguard fought like heroes. The chronicle says they felled their enemies as if they were mowing grass with a scythe. But the enemy were too many. Melek fell. Knyaz Fyodor fell. Branok fell. Word that Dmitry was dead began to spread through the Rus troops. Some wavered. The chronicles say some fled. But a brave survivor from the bodyguard, not named in the chronicles, carried Dmitry's banner to the Grand Knyaz, who now dropped his disguise and revealed himself, calling on his men to continue the fight. The main regiment had been badly mauled, but the Mongols' eagerness to get to Dmitry had led them into error. Both Rus wings now engaged, and Mamai's cavalry lost its room to maneuver. The close-quarters melee had been the Rus forte since the days of the Varangians. This went on for another hour. The chronicler writes that such a battle raged it was impossible to tell whether it was Tartars coming for the Rus or the Rus for the Tartars. Dmitry had 2 horses killed under him. All of his bodyguard were dead or wounded. Slowly but surely, superior numbers were winning the day, and the Rus were being pushed back. As gaps began to appear in the line, Mamai ordered more of his cavalry to pass through to attack the Rus second line. The men of Vladimir launched a countercharge to drive them back. They were successful, but as they chased the enemy, they came into range of the Genoese crossbows and were slaughtered. The right regiment was holding, but the left regiment began to retreat, effectively rotating the whole Russian line towards the east. Mamai brought up his final reserves, commanded by his current puppet, Bulak Khan, Mongol cavalry with Armenian Circassian archers, and threw them against that flank. In the centre, the rotating Russian line finally opened space for the Mongol cavalry to maneuver, and they began to reform. The exhausted Rus began to fall back, and the Mongols thought they saw the way opening to encircle them and attack from the rear. But this was what Dmitry had been expecting. In the forest, the commander of his hidden regiment, Knyaz Vladimir Andreevich, had been chomping at the bit to enter the fight for hours. Only the stern word of Dmitry's man, Dmitry Mikhailovich Bobrok-Valinsky, had persuaded him to stick to the plan, as the tale of the rout of Mamai has it. Seeing the death of the sons of Rus, Knyaz Vladimir Andreevich could not restrain himself. "What is the use of standing by in our situation?" he cried. "And what good are we doing? Who are we helping? Our knyazes and our boyars, all our sons are being massacred. But Bobrok Valinsky replied, O knyaz, the situation is dire, but our time has not yet come. We must bear this a little longer, until the time is right, and then we will give our enemies what they deserve. They were waiting for Mamai to fully commit his reserves, who, suspecting nothing and with victory before their eyes, left their own flank open. As the tale of the rout of Mamai puts it, and there came the 8th hour of the day, when the south wind blew behind us, and Bobrok Valinsky loudly called, Knyaz Vladimir, our time has come, the hour is upon us. Brothers and friends, be bold, the power of the Holy Spirit is with us. And his friends and companions sprang from the green oak like falcons, like David's children, and with the heart of lions like fierce wolves falling on sheep, and they began to slaughter the Tartars without mercy. Knyaz Vladimir had some of Rus's best warriors, and their timing was perfect. The fresh troops swept out of the forest, smashed Mamai's reserve aside, and continued to charge into the already tired main Mongol force. On the other side, the suddenly reinvigorated Rus stopped giving ground and began to push back. The momentum shifted, and the Mongols broke. Seeing new warriors gallop forth and fall on their foe like savage beasts preying on a flock of sheep, he said to his men, Let us flee, for we cannot wait to see if things get better, but we can save our heads. Many chased after them, but they could not catch them because their horses were tired, and Mamai's horses were fresh, and he left the chase behind him. The tale of the rout of Mamai. Fast horses were not quite enough on their own to let Mamai escape. The Genoese infantry stood between him and the oncoming Rus. They stood their ground until almost all of them were killed, but they gave him time to get away. Around the battlefield, the Mongol forces broke and tried to flee. They ran into the rivers. Their horses fell on the steep banks and lost their footing in the fast-flowing streams. Infantry were trampled in the waters. Rus archers shot them without mercy. As the chronicler writes, the River Don's waters were mixed with blood. The heads of Tartars rolled like stones. Pagan bodies fell like oaks. The Rus had suffered greatly, losing a third of their force. It took 7 days to bury the dead. In Zadonshina, Moscow boyar Mikhail Alexandrovich tries to count the dead. 40 boyars of Moscow, 12 knyazes of Byeloozersk, 30 Novgorod posadniks, 20 boyars of Kolomna, 40 boyars of Serpukhov, 30 Lithuanian knights, 20 boyars of Pereyaslavl, 25 boyars of Kostroma, 35 boyars of Vladimir, 50 boyars of Suzdal, 40 boyars of Murom, 70 boyars of Ryazan, 34 boyars of Rostov, 23 boyars of Dmitrovsk, 60 boyars of Mozhaisk, 30 boyars of Zvenigorodsk, and 15 boyars from Uglich. Modern historians estimate losses of 5,000 to 8,000, including a significant part of the boyar warrior elite. It was worse for the Mongols. The chronicler's claim that 9 out of 10 of them died is probably exaggerated, but in a rout like this, it is reasonable to estimate that they lost 2 to 3 times as many as the Rus. Mamai's power was broken. He would never back another Khan. He tried to raise another army against Toktamish a few months later, but few would answer his call, and he was crushed at the Kalka River. With just 8 bodyguards, carrying as much gold as they could manage, he fled to the Genoese at Kaffa. But Kaffa had no warm welcome for the man who had spent the lives of their soldiers ensuring his own escape. They executed him, and then asked Toktamish for a new agreement securing their trading rights. Toktamish was generous. And Knyaz Dmitry returned with a great victory, like Moses won against Amalek. And there was peace in the Rus land, and his enemies had been put to shame. Other nations, hearing about his God-given victories over his foes, all recognized his strength. The schismatics and rebels of his kingdom all perished. The tale of the life and death of Grand Knyaz Dmitry Ivanovich. Dmitry had certainly won a famous victory. He had gone up against the largest Mongol army that had been seen in Eastern Europe for a century, and he had outfought and outthought it. But was it the beginning of the end of the Tatar yoke? Well, that's for the next episode. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.